In life, nothing is perfect, and that includes firmware and software. One great countermeasure is to make sure these things are patched periodically. Vulnerabilities get discovered over time with both firmware code and software. Patching can fix security and stability problems discovered. When we decide that we're going to deploy patches, especially on a larger scale, we need a way to monitor that patch deployment to ensure it succeeded. We also should have an enterprise class solution that allows us to monitor for patch compliance so that at any given moment we can run a report to see which devices on the network do not comply with the latest patches and therefore present a security risk. Many modern solutions also allow us to inject patches to operating system images. So, for example, we might have a Windows 10 standard corporate image that we deploy to new desktops. But if that image was built a year ago, generally speaking, it's a year out of date with patches. So, there are solutions such as Microsoft System Center Configuration Manager, among others, that allow us to inject patches into the image itself even without it being deployed. The benefit here is that when we deploy that image, it's up to date with the latest patches. For example, here in Microsoft System Center Configuration Manager, I've got a Windows 7 Enterprise image, and if I were to right click on it, I have the option to schedule updates. Now, when that dialog box opens up, the first page of the wizard gives me a list of related updates, in this case for Windows 7, and I can select or deselect the appropriate updates. Now, when I click the next button at the bottom, I can then schedule when I want these injected into that image. So the beauty here is that when I deploy that Windows 7 Enterprise image in this specific example, it will be up to date. As mentioned, patching also deals with firmware updates. So at the hardware level, that includes things like BIOS updates on motherboards, wireless router firmware updates to close security holes, printer firmware updates, router firmware updates, switches, mobile devices like smartphones, and Internet of Thing or IoT firmware updates. These days, IoT is used for a lot of consumer devices like home video surveillance systems and the remote capability to control heating and lights and so on. All of these types of firmware need to have the latest patches applied to make sure they work correctly, support enhanced features, and of course, close any known security vulnerabilities. At the software level, of course, patching will apply fixes to operating systems, drivers, applications running within the operating systems, or even mobile devices and the apps running on them. Pictured on the screen, we see a screenshot of Windows Server Update Services or WSUS. Now, unlike SCCM, WSUS is available for free from Microsoft with their server products. And what we see pictured here is a number of approved updates being applied for a group. We can see in the left part of the diagram, we've got a Halifax computers group as well as an update testing group. These are groups of computers that we can target approved updates to. This way we know exactly which devices are receiving which patches. Patching should also include deadlines, whereby we provide a notification to the user that a deadline is approaching and the patches will apply regardless of what the user selects. However, when we apply patches, this can slow down the computer and the network. And the last thing we really want to do is hamper user productivity. But at the same time, we must adhere to organizational security standards for patching and security. So what we might do is configure maintenance windows. A maintenance window is supported by various products, and it's usually after hours where maintenance is allowed, such as the application of software updates. The idea with the maintenance window is to minimize the disruption to the end user. We can also configure the reboot behavior. So for example, if a user is using their laptop to present something in a boardroom, we don't want their computer rebooting in the middle of their presentation. So of course, there are many ways to get around that, including making sure that we use maintenance windows after hours. And also, there are some software tools that can run in presentation mode that will ignore any things like patch reboot requirements and so on until a presentation is complete. License agreements apply to some software updates. This might be automated or the end user might have to interact with the installation of an update to accept a license agreement. In this video, we discussed patching.